So to determine if a particular resonance structure for a molecule is a better Lewis dot structure than another, meaning more reasonable, we use this concept called formal charge. Formal charge is the hypothetical charge on atoms in a particular structure. That, along with our knowledge about electronegativity for elements, will help us determine if there is one best Lewis dot structure. So to determine the formal charge for each atom in a Lewis dot structure, you need to take the number of valence electrons for that particular element, or for that particular atom, and then subtract the sum of all of the lone pair electrons on that atom added to half of the bonded pair of electrons. So it's normal number of valence electrons minus assigned electrons in that Lewis dot structure. So if we were to take the thiocyanate anion as an example, we're going to go ahead and draw 3 Lewis dot structures that satisfy the octet rule. We now want to see if one of these structures is better than another, but to do that, we need to first determine the formal charge on each. So let's start with this first Lewis dot structure. I'm going to determine the formal charge on nitrogen by getting my pointer, and I'm going to take the number of valence electrons for nitrogen, which is 5, and subtract that from the sum of all lone pair electrons. Now here you're going to actually count the number of electrons that are in those lone pairs. So for nitrogen, I have 3 lone pairs, but that's a total of 6 electrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to have a 6 for that part of the lone pair electrons, and then I'm going to add that to 1/2 of the bonded pair of electrons. When I look at nitrogen, I see there's just a single bond. So half of 2 electrons, because a single bond is 2 electrons, half of 2 is 1. So I'm going to add 1 to that. So the formal charge on my nitrogen atom is going to be a -2. Now let's do carbon. Carbon has a valence in group of 4, has a valence of 4. I'm going to subtract. There are no lone pairs on that carbon, so a big fat 0. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds, so 8 electrons, but half of those is 4. So I'm going to add 4 to that according to my formula, and so the formal charge of carbon is 4 minus 4, a big fat 0. So that is the formal charge of carbon. There's my formal charge of nitrogen. Now let's do sulfur. Sulfur, which is out in group 6, that's my number of valence electrons. I'm going to subtract the number of lone pair electrons, which is 1, 2. Add that to the half number of bonded pair electrons, which in this case is 3. And so that gives me a formal charge of sulfur of +1. So that is my formal charge for sulfur. So that needs to be done with all Lewis dot structures for a particular molecule for resonance. I would encourage you to check yourself to do the formal charges for the other 2 resonance structures. So that's the first step if you have resonance structures, to determine if there's one best Lewis dot structure. And then how do you use that information? You use that information along with these 2 rules to determine which resonance structure is best, which in short says that you want to have as many atoms in that Lewis dot structure have a formal charge close to 0. But if you have any atoms in that Lewis dot structure that have a negative formal charge, you want those negative formal charges to reside on the more electronegative atoms. So knowing those 2 rules and looking back at those 3 Lewis dot structures, which I encourage you to do, you will see that the middle Lewis dot structure is the one that has atoms with formal charge is closest to 0 and with negative charge on the most electronegative atom. So you should be able to use that formula for formal charge along with these two rules to determine if there is a resonance structure that is best for a particular Lewis dot structure.